Today we're looking at a green ink by Faber Castell, Moss Green. Hi, I'm Adam and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. There's timestamps down below so that if you are only interested in certain parts, you can skip around, but if you've got the time, please check out the entire video. Also, you can follow me over on Instagram, and if you like fountain pen ink reviews, I would invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Tasha Spectrum with a music nib, wrote with it for a day, and used it to take my notes for this video. I used 3 papers to standardize in some of my writing samples: Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. There are additional writing samples that'll come later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it came in a vial like this. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X 450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X 750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is just a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather, spread, halo sheen. It does offer quite a few spots of shading throughout the writing. It is not too bad, really. 11 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather, spread, halo sheen, some very nice shading throughout this writing. Just stepped up a little bit from what went on with the extra fine. 16 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both does show some color variation left to right, and we get plenty in the writing. Tomoe River. No bleeding, normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 20 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the stub with no feather, spread, halo sheen, or shade, and 29 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both shows no color variation, and we're not getting any. And Rhodia with no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather, spread, halo sheen, nice shading throughout this writing. Much better than we saw in the Clairfontaine for the extra fine. 13 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine, lighter than the stub, with no feather, spread, halo sheen, still some very nice shading showing up here. 18 seconds to dry. Now, both scrubbies show some color variation, but the extra fine shows a lot more than the medium, and we did get it in the writing. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this kind of grayish green at the bottom. It certainly looks a bit green, but has a kind of gray feel to it. It formed a line very quickly with the filter paper, and it still did push up. Now we get a very nice light blue and then a very bright green across the top. Now the one on the right that I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water, all of that green stayed down at the bottom, and so did a bunch of blue. And it's really interesting because it's making that bottom line look much more blue than it did in the original filter, or the original chromatography. You see very little of that green that moved up. The blue is moved up and is a little bit lighter, and that green at the top, much brighter this time. It looks like some of that might have stayed as well. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I would not use this in a note-taking situation if I wanted to be able to go back and highlight, because it's really blowing out that lowercase h, and I'm not going to risk my important notes. Now, water's only lifting the darkest tone off, and it's leaving a lot of the ink still on the paper. Pen flush is starting to break this ink down. You see where it's starting to show some of the white of the paper coming through. So this ink's really bonded with the paper pretty well. It only took water to get this out of my pen though. It didn't take the pen flush. 1/3 bleach solution is completely removing it from the paper. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with a realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Now I'm going to link the video that shows how I do my testing and calculations. Graf von Faber Castell's moss green has a viscosity of 1.97, making this a wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average all of those. Now, for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Graf von Faber Castell's moss green has an average dry time of 18 seconds, making it normal. Instead of finding inks that look like Graf von Faber Castell's moss green, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I went for a nice red, and I chose Colorverse C Europa. The second writing sample is done on Viscosity, Franklin Christoph, and black and red paper. Here we're looking at Viscosity notebooks. Now we get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, some very nice shading going on here. Especially look at the word brown. It's very nice here. 8 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine, not quite as dark as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, still some very nice shading throughout all of this writing. 12 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show good color variation, and we got it in the writing. Franklin Christoph paper, with no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is just a little bit lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen. There are some pepperings of shading throughout there, but it's a more absorbent paper, so it doesn't show off as nice. 5 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. 8 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both doesn't really show much color variation, although it's not too bad with the extra fine. Black and red notebooks. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. 6 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, and 8 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both are showing us no color variation, and we didn't get any here. That is all that I have for the writing samples. So what do I think of Faber Castell's moss green? There is a peppering of shading that occurs within the writing quite frequently, and there's a lot of color variation that you get depending on the nib that you have. It makes me feel like it's less saturated than the dark tones that you tend to get on the page, although I have no way of really testing the ink saturation accurately. What nib and pen give the best writing experience with this ink? I found for everything I worked it in, I really preferred it from a medium flow fine or medium flow broad pen. It seems kind of distant from each other, but I got the best color variation in the writing, that shading, and I got a very pleasant tone where I didn't care for the much darker green that I got from wet pens. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.